The Washington Capitals were another source of a viral moment from this year's NHL Draft, but how was their draft class in general? Well, let's find out. So at 17th overall, the Washington Capitals kind of, in my view, stunned the hockey world a little bit by drafting Terik Parascsák at 17th overall. I think this is going to be a very interesting one to keep an eye on long term. I was not a fan of Parascsák this year, unfortunately. I just see the smarts people were talking about, but I just feel like he has a long way to go before being an NHL pick, especially one worth drafting at 17th overall considering who was on the board. I spoke to someone who said if you took Tanner Howe and put him on the Prince George Cougars and took Terik Parascsák and put him on the Regina Pats, does their draft position completely flip? And I think that is probably true. I think Parascsák is a player who needs to work on the pace of his game. I saw him at the same hotel I was staying at in Vegas. He looked like he weighed about 100 pounds, so I think physical development is going to be important. And NHL people also feel the same way, that Parascsák in the first round in the first place was a bit of a risk, and top 20 on a team that may be entering the early stages of a rebuild is really something. So we'll see how it works. I'm never ever going to say that it's impossible for a player to play in the NHL. I just think this was a massive risk for the Washington Capitals to take based on what I've seen of Parascsák this season. At 43rd overall, it's a different kind of risky pick from Washington, but a pleasant one in taking Cole Hutson. I had Cole Hutson at 45th on my board, so this is around where I thought he probably should go, and I did have some other players I might have pushed for a little bit more, but I have to admit, I think Cole Hutson came a long way on the ice this season from where he was at the start of the year to where he finished at the under-18s. He was great at the under-18 tournament as a puck-rushing defenseman, driving offensive results really well, while still showcasing some defensive issues that do need some ironing out. A lot of people seem to be conflating him and his brother and trying to find out who's better than who, but for me, in a lot of ways, I think there are things that Cole Hutson does that are more projectable than his brother, but his brother does bring more tools that are more special and unique. Cole Hutson just strikes me as a pretty good puck-rushing defenseman, as a secondary power play unit guy on your third pair that can move the puck decently well. I think you could have done a lot worse than Cole Hutson here. This was a pretty solid pick at 43, even though I might be a little bit more optimistic than some on the hockey side of things in the NHL. In a similar vein at 52, they drafted Leon Muggli, who I had ranked 60th, and I like Muggli. I'm just not sure what he's going to be in the NHL, if anything. He's a really smart puck mover who can see the ice really well, he's got some skill, a pretty good shot that he uses pretty often. I just thought the results were a little bit questionable. In a way, he's kind of similar to Cole Hutson, just without as much of a puck rusher's mentality. I think he's an interesting player. I do think the production is a little bit misleading, even though it was really notable at that high of a level in Switzerland. So he deserved to get drafted. I think this is a round where it makes sense to take a chance on him, and if he turns out as a pretty decent offensive defenseman in the NHL, then great. At 75th overall, the Washington Capitals drafted Ilya Protas, brother of Washington Capital forward Alexei Protas. Drafting family members of players on your team or staff on your team or anything like that can be a bit of a gray area that might not be the best strategy, but I am a fan of Ilya Protas, and this is another player where they drafted him right around where I had him ranked. I had him at 71. I was pleasantly surprised to see him go this early in the draft. He's very young in this draft class, he's very tall, and I do think that the back half of his season was significantly better than the first half. He seemed to gain a lot more confidence, a lot more determination. He was moving the puck a lot more effectively from what I saw in the back half of the year than the first. I think this is an interesting long-term bet for the Capitals. I don't think he has a tremendous amount of upside, but I do think he has all of the physical tools necessary to become at least a bottom 6 NHL minutes eater that can take on pressure, deal with it pretty well, with some underrated skill under pressure that can battle to the net and generate some scoring chances. Now, take what I just said about Ilya Protas and make him almost a year older and put him in Quebec. You have Eric Matejko. I wasn't a huge fan of Matejko, but he was on my watch list at the end of the year, and at 90th overall, sure. He's big, he's got some good range on him as well, he's got a simple but effective approach to the offensive game, getting pucks to the front of the net at a pretty good rate. I just wonder how much his level of physical dominance at the Quebec level will translate to the NHL or the AHL in the future. I don't mind him. He's apparently a great kid, which is awesome. And at the 5th pick for the Capitals in this draft, I think it kind of makes sense. There might have been other names I would have looked at, but this was around the range where I started kind of going, all right, I mean, I'm not going to go to battle for a bunch of these guys that I have ranked relatively high. guy, and Matejko was on my list, and so I think it was a decent pick. At 114th, they drafted US NTDP goaltender Nicholas Kempf. Kempf is a player I've seen over the course of this season here and there, and I've thought he's been a pretty good goaltender. Again, I'm not a goaltending expert, and he didn't really move the needle enough for me to put him on the list ahead of some of the other goaltenders that got drafted, but he's pretty solid and has shown well for the NTDP this year, and again, you leave him in college, and maybe there's something in a few years. He's going to a good program, so let's check him out in a few years and see where he is. At 178th, they dipped their toe into Central Europe going for Peter Sikora. Now, Sikora's a player who was on my list earlier in the year, and I pulled him off as time went on. But I do like Sikora. He's a bit of a thin player, but I do think there are some really good hockey sense tools there, a bit of skill, he's got some good intensity in his game. I think there's a decent profile around him to maybe become an interesting prospect in the future. He was very productive at the Czech junior level this year, and I don't think he looked that out of place at the men's level this year. He was a little bit physically outmatched here and there, but he was moving the puck pretty well and just kind of participated in play at the highest level of hockey in Czech Republic in a pretty good way. But at 212th overall, the Washington Capitals just stepped up to the plate and took a Babe Ruth-style swing on Miroslav Satan Jr. Son of Miroslav Satan, famous in the 90s and 2000s for having one of the best last names in the NHL, Miroslav Satan to me breaks down pretty simply. He is probably the fastest 6'7" skater I have ever seen, and there's not a whole lot else to him. I don't know what he's gonna be, but he is so much fun to watch. He is a very interesting player. He's got a pretty good wrist shot as well that he showcased and scored some goals with, but he just didn't get a ton of chances to use it because he lacks a lot of skill. He can have problems getting through pressure. He doesn't really move the puck super well, but off the puck, playing physically, playing fast, playing hard, you can do that in the NHL. And I think Miroslav Satan has an outside shot of being a guy that can fill in and some potential for more. I was really intrigued by him. He didn't quite end up on my list this year, but I was fascinated by him and would be fascinated to see what happens in his career in the next few years. And I'm really happy to see him get picked, and we'll see what happens with him in Washington over the next little while. So the Washington Capitals were really, really hard for me to rate this year, but I ended up with a 2C. I think there's just a tremendous amount of risk with this draft class for them. Yeah, I look at a guy like Protas or Matejko or Satan and see a guy who has size and all the tools necessary to play some kind of role in the NHL. I think Peter Sikora is interesting, and Nick Kempf has his fans. I'm just not totally sold on Muggli being an NHL player. I think Hutson does have issues that could limit his NHL effectiveness, and the real issue for me is that the risk on Terik Parascsák at 17 to me is massive. 17th overall, they could have done some real damage, and maybe I'll eat my words in a little while, but I really struggled to see what Terik Parascsák brought as a top 20 NHL pick. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I would have gone in a different direction that high in the draft, and so it downgrades things a little bit for me, but I'm not super down on the draft class as a whole. I think they could have some interesting parts here. So with that, we close out the Washington Capitals, and our next report will be on the Vancouver Canucks. If you liked the video, check our description box for our Fanatics affiliate link, where anything you buy in the store will give us a small kickback, or go to Scouching.ca, where a subscription will get you access to a private Discord server, as well as tons of data tables for drafted and undrafted prospects, and plenty of other cool stuff you can check out on that site.